This is the Conscious Economics Podcast. Your co-hosts are two women who found themselves in careers on Bay Street, but decided that there was something missing. So here we are. I'm Rhiannon Roseland. I'm your co-host and the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada. I'm also the co-founder of Conscious Economics.
Hi, I'm Asil, the CEO of Conscious Economics and a financial therapist.
Now, we call ourselves economic healers, and that is a term that I'm sure nobody has heard before, but we really believe that if we want to heal our systems and create a more equitable society, it starts with actually healing our relationship with money and the economy.
When you join us on this podcast, you'll be exposed to courageous conversations that help us examine, heal, and redefine the relationship we have with money. Join us on this journey as we co-create the new economy together.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Conscious Economics Podcast. I am your co-host, Rhiannon.
And I'm Asil, and we're here to talk to you today about a conflict resolution framework for money arguments. Technically, it's actually a conflict resolution framework for anything, really, but we're specifically going to focus on how it applies to money arguments.
Have you had a lot of money arguments in your life, Asil?
Who doesn't? I mean,
because I haven't, because I'm avoidant. So, truly, I avoid argument at all costs. So,
money arguments or conflicts in general?
Well, in general, I don't really like conflict, and in the deep work that I've done to understand myself better through therapy and study and whatever else, I grew up in a really traumatic household where there was a lot of fighting and arguing and whatever, and I sort of played the role of peacemaker as a child. Mm-hmm. So in my adult scenario, conflict makes me feel very shut down. So I will kind of do anything to avoid conflict, including selling myself out on things or putting myself in positions that I don't want to be in. So I was married for 10 years and with my partner for close to 14 years. And we really, truly, very rarely had any arguments, let alone money arguments, because I would do everything in my power to figure out, solutions to things so it wouldn't escalate into conflict. So even just for me today, learning this conflict resolution tool is really healthy for me to understand. And this has been something that in now my current relationship with my now husband, he constantly is telling me it's okay if we disagree. It's okay if something happens. It doesn't mean it's all over and done, in this moment. So it's something that I'm really working to get comfortable with.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can actually relate to that a lot, because what happens is my nervous system gets activated when there's conflict, and I become literally a wounded inner child who becomes clingy. My partner wants space and wants to go figure it out and to cool down, and I'm like, please don't go, what's going on? It's very dysfunctional on my end, but I'm totally aware of it, and I'm working on it, and we actually had a really healthy conversation around it, because I'm also training myself to see conflict as an opportunity for growth. And this is actually the first thing I want to lay here, the foundation, before we even get into this money framework. Is built on 4 steps, and it's something that I studied in the financial therapy journals from the Financial Therapy Association. And what actually is important to even understand before we get into the 4 steps is laying the stage, and laying the stage is actually viewing conflict as naturally occurring process, and it's something that is not only important, but it totally is an opportunity for growth, because you can't grow without that conflict, and it's how you deal with it that matters. It's not the presence of it, it's your attitude.
Why have we not been taught this in kindergarten?
I know.
These are the fundamental things that cause so much suffering in life. And I know so many that feel that when there's some kind of conflict, I've seen one small conflict end relationships and friendships, because people don't have the capacity to understand that we could be on a different position but still find our commonality or get over this, hurdle. And a lot of the times, because we are not well versed in how to, go through a conflict situation with integrity, with grace, with love, with compassion, we end up saying and doing a lot worse things that only make it that much more challenging. And I am so, guilty of that, because for me, conflict can trigger my inner sort of child trauma so deeply that you can go into that defense, or you can go into that place where you're like, you know, just like want to like put it, you don't want to take the blame. It's like somehow if you take the blame, then your whole identity is falling apart. And so people will like argue tooth and nail to try and hold the point, as opposed to trying to solve the issue.
There's different archetypes. For some, it's people who take the blame willingly because they are stuck in that victim mentality. Even if it's nothing to do with them, they actually always think it's their fault. Yeah. There's ones who always want to point the finger at something else and you know, throw the hot potato to someone else. Why did I say hot potato? I'm not sure.
It makes sense to me.
Okay. And there's others who avoid it and pretend nothing's happening and just get distracted and like stay on the surface and the superficial levels of life. So essentially what's important here, based on the conflict theory, is the following assumptions are important in order to set a stage for growth-oriented discussions. And the three foundational elements is: first, expect money arguments. Expect it. It's going to happen. It's important for it to happen. It's necessary for it to happen. You can't possibly avoid it. It's going to happen, period. Second, conflict is an opportunity. So embrace that. So not only are you going to accept that it's going to happen, but you're also going to be happy that it's happening, so that you can view it as an opportunity for growth. And the third important thing here is balancing power. And that's very important, especially because there tends to be very awkward power dynamics when one particular partner is making more money than the other. So it's important to find opportunities to balance the power, so that when you're coming to the table to discuss this money conflict, you're on the same page, or at least starting on the similar starting point.
Okay. Very, very interesting. So is there common money arguments? Like, is it always the same kind of things? I guess it could really be anything.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
Money arguments. So there's some themes or patterns that arrive maybe around how to raise your kids. That's a very common one with couples. But the framework that we're discussing here doesn't just apply in partnerships like marriage or romantic partnerships. It could also be business relationships. It could also be between you and your friends. So this particular framework could apply, or even in your workforce. Like if you're discussing a budget with your supervisor, or a raise with your employee, like these things can happen anywhere. And it's important that we have some tools to be able to use when we have a heated argument around money that we have to engage in. So after we've expected it and used it as an opportunity, let's talk about some of the principles on how to address it and approach it. So the first important one is separate the people from the problem. And this is really, really interesting, because what happens is when we're often arguing about something, we are using you language, like you are this, you are that. So naturally, as you're receiving all these particular accusations, you become defensive. And now we lost sight of what it is we're arguing about, because now it became personal.
Right.
So separating people from the problem is very, very key. And the key premise behind this is to be tough on the problem, but not tough on the person. So like once we're looking at it objectively and we're trying to tackle this issue, then we now become on the same side. Right. Because if I'm attacking you, then I'm actually on the opposite side of you. But if we're both attacking the problem, then we become on the same side.
It's interesting. And I think that that's a really good way to approach it. It's not always easy. It's not always the instinct, but I think that it's very helpful. Yeah.
So I'll give you examples of how that can be. So for example, if you are, let's say, in a romantic relationship and you're discussing your spent cash flow, that's a very common thing that couples stress about. Instead of me, let's say I'm in a romantic relationship with you, instead of me approaching you and saying, you are spending so much, you are careless with your money, you are this, you are that, this is how I'm attacking you. I'm using you language, and this is how me and you are on different sides of the problem. Versus when I tell you our income is not capable of sustaining the spending habits we are currently enduring. So now I'm using we language. It's our income, it's our problem. You and I are on the same side, and now we're looking
trying
at
to solve it.
What's going on.
Yeah, much healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the first step. Focus on the problem and not the person.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now, back to the episode.
Second one is harder to establish, but it's also important. Focus on the interest and not the position. So what that means, that's a harder thing to understand here. Interest focus on why you want certain things, why you have the position you're actually claiming for yourself. But interest reflects the underlying desires and concerns and value. For example, I want to create a family experience. Is some of the value, because you have, let's say, family is a value of yours, but the position itself would be, I want to buy a lake home. So when you're focused on the interests, you're focused on the value that family is a value for me. Now, in order for me to achieve that value, my vision or my position is, I need to take my family to this vacation, or I need to buy this specific thing, or I need this, or I need that. But when we're trying to understand the underlying desires and concerns, then we can at least have a common ground to what it is we're trying to achieve and align ourselves there. So for example, let's say you want to take your family on vacation versus I want to buy a bigger house. If we are focused on the positions we have, then we are at opposite sides. Because you want, I want a bigger house, you want a vacation. But when we step back and understand what is the underlying desire and the underlying interest, both of us care about bringing experiences to our family. And now we're on the same team again.
And it just gives us more to work with. Then we can start to see where our interests overlap and where there might be maybe a different solution than maybe both of the positions that we've both put on the table.
Yeah.
Which I think is really healthy as well. Yeah.
Because the most common and powerful interests are based on human needs. And these are security, basically economic well-being, a sense of belonging, each one of us have a different value system and different priorities to these value systems. But what's important for us is once we understand the interests between us and the person we're arguing with, then we have shared ground and alignment. And even though some arguments can occur on how we want to achieve these specific interests or how we want to fulfill these specific needs, at least there's a commonality when we realize we have similar needs and similar approaches. The problem is much harder when our value systems are very drastically different. When I want to focus, let's say, on lifestyle and you want to focus, let's say, on materialistic accumulation, then when we realize our value systems are really, really misaligned, it's much harder to approach a problem that way versus if we realize we are aligned on our values, at least we just disagree on how we think we are going to accomplish
But I mean,
them.
even that, getting to the fundamental understanding that your value system isn't different than somebody else will then lead to having to make other decisions around what you do. That's something I can relate to really deeply. It's, why I left a marriage, because in the end of the day, if your value systems are not aligned, it's very, very difficult to find a common ground.
100%.
It just is. You're not going after the same things. You don't want the same things.
Yeah.
You don't value the same things. Yeah.
But once you align yourself on that, uncovering your interests, while they can be very difficult to do because it takes a lot of vulnerability to uncover what is really underlying my position here. I want, when we are fixated on what we think we want, it becomes much harder to work with because you're stubborn and set in your ways.
Yeah.
But if you took a step back and start uncovering the true underlying desires and emotions that are leading you to be stuck in your particular position, that's when you're able to start actively listening and becoming more patient and vulnerable. And it opens doors for a much more ability to connect with the other. So maybe experiences matter a lot to someone because they didn't have a lot of experiences growing up and they want to make up for it. Maybe buying a bigger house is more important for someone because they want to be able to host others, and there's certain things that are attached to that concept of a bigger house. So everything becomes much more of a story that helps you understand the position. But once you're focused on the desires and interests, then you become more compassionate to why that person wants a certain thing versus just focus on the fact that they want something different than you.
Yeah.
So it opens room for not just mutual understanding, but also compassion, which is a huge important piece. The third step here is generating options for mutual gain. So now that we understand and we align our interests, now we can creatively cultivate new options that create a win-win situation. It's very important to create a win-win situation because often when you create a win-lose situation, it's a very temporary win for you because in the future it's going to come back build resentment. So can you think of ways in how this potentially appears in your life?
Yeah, well, again, I think when you can understand what the core value or what someone's real genuine interest is, then although it may not be the original thing that brought you to the argument, but there could be something that you could figure out that has mutual gain. I'm trying to think of an example where that has happened. I mean, without revealing every single story of my personal life. So
no, you don't have to reveal stories, but we can talk about patterns. So for example, when creating options, couple need to, I'm using couples here as an example. Like I said, this could apply to anybody. They can use caution when employing methods focused on positions. Again, going back to the idea that we have to put what we think we want on the side when we're discussing this conflict, just so that we can become more creative in how we approach it. So for example, a financial conflict resolution strategy proposed within this journal that I was discussed is to actually write a different separate list of personal goals and life goals and compare these lists with each other. So if we're having a conflict, then we can start looking at which part of this conflict we're actually overlapping in. So this strategy is very useful for facilitating discussions. So we can start drawing overlapping themes that come up in our life. But the risk is putting so much negotiation on positions without considering the underlying risks, which compromise both people losing something.
Right.
And that's really the common thing that happens, especially when power dynamics aren't really established. People in a relationship where one is making more money than the other feel that the person making the money has more leeway to making these decisions, and that's where resentment is built, and it's much harder to deal with in these times and these conditions. So the last thing I would add as a tool, so after you've discussed the problem and focused on the problem, not the person, you've aligned your interests, the last step is to establish an objective criteria. And what that means is to simply, now you have different options, you want to pick the right solution to move forward with, you want to address that objectively, not based on your interest or position, but from an objective criteria. And that could look differently depending on the situation you're dealing with. But what you would do here is potentially consult with a professional, a financial planner, maybe a budget sheet. Like that's when you're using a practical tools, whether it's a cash flow calculator. For example, if you're debating should I take my family on vacations or should I buy a bigger house, then objective criteria here would really go back to the bricks and mortars of cash flow and budgeting to see which one is more feasible for your family versus which one you personally want more.
Yeah, and not always just what you feel is going to be the solution. So having some of these practical tools can definitely help. I think it's really, really a good first step to even just acknowledge that these things will happen and that, you know, there are frameworks in order to deal with it. Again, that takes practice. And generally speaking, I hope that you're listening to this right now and you're not in a money conflict so that you have these tools, because a lot of the times when we get into the conflict, it kind of all these things go out the window and just our natural reactive patterning kind of shows up. So part of bringing the mindfulness element into it is being able to take that extra pause, that extra second to not do the reactionary thing, but to actually do the thing that's going to yield you the best results and be able to create that foundational, you know, connection with the person that you're going through these challenges
Well, you
with.
brought up such a great point. I think we should have even started with that. Like we said about setting the stage with expecting money arguments, but what's most important is not to approach these topics unless you're ready and prepared. So some of this requires reflection on your own time. I always recommend creating, and we talked about this, setting a money date. So not only are money dates important within you and yourself, but it's also important with you and somebody that you're engaged with on a financial level, whether it's a partner, business partner at work. Constantly putting business dates or money dates for yourself helps you come prepared to discuss money.
Mm-hmm.
Often what happens is these issues happen abruptly without us expecting it, and it's because we're reacting from an emotional sense that they just worsen and become just harder to deal with, versus if we create and be proactive about setting, okay, like at the beginning of every month we're gonna have a money date to discuss like the outlook of the month, or maybe on a quarterly basis we're gonna just do a quick check base to see where we're at financially. On an annual basis we're gonna visit with our financial planner and we're gonna be discussing long-term strategies along with any changes with our situation. So when you're having consistent money dates, be it weekly, be it monthly, be it quarterly, and each of these have different goals associated with it, you're proactive and you're prepared so that you're actually trying to avoid the emotional abrupt situations that just come out of nowhere.
And I think that also sort of leads into the point that you could want to adopt this framework. You could understand what the value is, but if the other person on the other side of the table is like absolutely not, you know, committed or down to that framework, it becomes really challenging too. Like, who's been in a situation where you are coming with a bit more, you know, groundedness or whatever else, and then someone is kind of being reactionary, and then all of a sudden your patience wears thin for the thing that you're trying, and all of a sudden you're back in it again, and it's, you know, first flying around the living room. And this is kind of what happens. So I think it's really important.
If things are flying in the living room, stop what you're doing and
especially
revisit it later.
But this is why I think it's really important that we have these proactive conversations, just kind of entering into, I mean, like, you just got married.
Yeah.
I just got married.
That's right.
We got married within a few weeks of each other, and we know that down the line there are going to be moments of conflict. We realize that maybe before we even get to the conflict stage, while we're still in the coveted honeymoon stage, we say, hey, what kind of framework do we want to use when we do encounter something, and let's agree to it now while we're happy and harmonious, and let's know what that is and post it on the fridge so that when it comes, it's almost exciting, like, yay, the conflict's here, we prepared for this, we know what it is, it's on the fridge, let's do it. And
it's very interesting actually, because I was discussing this with my husband. I was gonna say fiance, because we literally just got married a few days ago, so it takes a second to get used to. But we're discussing, for example, different trips we want to do next year. We want to go to Bali. We want to go to Italy. We want to go to all these like amazing places. But I also want a bigger car and I want a bigger house, because we want to also start planning for a family. And his response to me, he's like, if you ever give me a choice between experiences and materialistic things in life, I'll always go for experiences. And that's also my value system. I value experiences over anything else. But at the same time, I feel like you need these fruits, you need this house, you need like you know, certain things on the ground before you go and like fly around. And in this case, literally, we're flying around.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because it was challenging, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm approaching it from an either or scenario, which is a scarcity mindset.
Right.
How can I approach it from how do I do this and do that?
Yeah. How do I accomplish
How I
both?
accomplish both? How
Yeah.
do I accomplish both? So we're still, I don't have the answer yet. We're still figuring out because like there's lots of variables in our lives. But it was an interesting thing to kind of understand. And these things are always going to come up, and it's always interesting to be proactive about these conversations.
Absolutely.
So that's my invitation to you.
Absolutely. So there's the framework. Use it if you will. We hope that you do. We hope we use it. We hope we don't get reactionary, although we have.
We will.
Before.
We will.
And you may too. Yeah. And that's the reality. But at least these tools exist. And I do find it so helpful to have some kind of a framework when dealing with these pieces. The one other thing that we use, because I like to interrupt and vice versa, we have like a talking stone.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we do, like, if you're holding the stone, then you're the one who has the floor, then you're saying the thing. So there's no but, like you have to wait for someone to finish, which I think is really an important thing too, because everyone wants to be heard and know that someone's listening, rather than just like gearing up their next like fly ball that they're going to throw out and they're not even taking in anything that you're saying.
That's very important. I love that tool. The talking stone, stick, pillow. I've heard like different
all
tools.
the different things.
Yeah. So there it is, folks. We have so much more to share, but that means another episode for you next week.
Yep.
So visit our consciouseconomics.ca website to learn more about what we're up to and to join this conscious economics movement.
Yes. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.